Hello, this is Devin with another episode of Writing Daily, my mostly daily podcast that talks about writing, how to live the writer's life, things that we examine and think about as we put ideas and thoughts to paper, and of course, how we promote ourselves and throw out ideas into the universe. I am Devin Galladay, your host. I am the editor-in-chief of InTheKnowTraveler.com, a fantastic site dedicated to traveling, and as well as the author of the forthcoming memoir, 10,000 Miles, with my dead father's ashes. Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about a book and sort of its deeper meaning, a book called Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth by Reza Aslan. I'm choosing that book in part because I'm reading it, but also there brings up some kind of interesting things for me while I'm reading it. It is, technically speaking, a history book. For those who don't know, Reza Aslan is a historian and an expert upon religion, and has done a lot of he's written lots of books. He's a very well respected guy. In his writing of this book on the life and times of Jesus, he gets, and by the way, welcome, Tom. As a matter of fact, before I dive in, welcome. If you like what I'm doing, as always, please consider hitting the like button or asking a question or saying hello, whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for being here, whether you're watching me live now or whether or not you are going to see me on YouTube or iTunes or one of the many other formats around the webs where you can find me. Welcome, Jason. And so tonight we're talking about the book by Reza Aslan, Zealot. I'm writing this a little bit less, about the sort of the style of the writing. I think it's a well-written book, but I think the thing that is inspiring me to make comment about it is that normally when I read a book on history, it's usually footnoted. In other words, there's the end of a sentence, and then there's going to be a little bit of a footnote that brings me down to the bottom of the page that justifies the author writing and saying what they're saying. In other words, there's going to be a very specific historical note that will allow me to see, oh, this is where the writer is coming from, or there might be even a section of notes in the back that'll allow me to flip to the end and go, oh, okay, here's precisely all the information that is kind of the source information where the writer is making this claim, so I can understand it from a historical perspective. And by the way, welcome John and Antonio and Kristen. Thank you so much for being here. So this particular book by Reza Aslan, who, by the way, in writing this book got a lot of heat for being a Muslim and writing about the life and times of Jesus, the historical Jesus. Ultimately, the book is sort of comparing, I believe, and contrasting sort of what we understand to be about Jesus's life, the sort of the author of Christianity, an agent of change, if you will, and then the historical Jesus, which Reza Aslan goes on to explain, is a different person. He brings up all kinds of historical text to back that up, but he doesn't necessarily do that when he makes particular claims that at time to time can seem a little bit surprising. And so from some aspects as a reader, it kind of comes across that he is just making these claims and making sort of like, here's information that leads us to believe this particular thing. But he doesn't kind of express it in a standard history book. What he does is he sort of like, here's these 5 things that happen, and that's why I'm saying this. But he's not bringing it in a presentation that's drawing a conclusion. What he's doing is making a statement of fact. So from a reader's point of view, it's very interesting. And the reason why I say it's interesting is because as a writer, if I were to write a book about, let's say, Jesus or any other historical figure, somebody, matter of fact, far less, I would immediately kind of describe my book as being historical fiction. In other words, I'm taking some accepted truths and then I can kind of play with it as I choose to. Even if it's all true, What I may not be able to say is, while all of the information I'm presenting is going to be sort of like a reasonable assumption of what, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln might say or do, I can't call it fact. That's why I will call it historical fiction. In other words, there's a certain shred of truth that we can honestly embrace, and ultimately I have to concede that there's only so much information that I can offer as being truthful. By the way, welcome Darren, good to see you, and Jenny, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. So the reason why I'm bringing up Zealot as an example is because what we know of the historical Jesus is really kind of thin. Now, by the way, this is, my opinion on the book. It has nothing to do with the Bible or anything like that. I'm talking specifically about this particular tomb. By the way, welcome Evelyn and Denny and David. Great to have everybody here. And as always, if you like what I'm doing, please consider hitting the like button or the wow button or something to that effect. It's always great. It lets me know that I'm on the right track. So when reading this book, so what separates somebody who's writing historical fiction about somebody that we all believe that we know and understand, versus something written by, I guess an expert. In other words, what we're saying in this particular book is that Reza Aslan's expertise about Jesus and his ability to research overrides any question that we may have about the facts of Jesus' life, because he's presenting them as absolute fact. It's not a good or a bad thing. What I'm saying is that there's two things that are going on here. One is that the writer is kind of laying claim that these are absolute. His conclusions are that the historical Jesus did X, Y, and Z. And to be in fairness, they are reasonable. The way he's explaining it, these are reasonable conclusions, and I have no doubt that his authority is based on genuine research. And so what's the difference between somebody who's writing historical fiction versus somebody who's writing a book, which I'm not even 100% sure what we would call this, but this without question is going to be in a nonfiction section. It is not going to be found in a fiction section. As an example, there was a book called Carter Beats the Devil that came out a number of years ago that has Harry Houdini as one of the characters. So it lends itself to historical fiction, but when I bought the book, I bought it in a fiction section of a bookstore. Zealot was absolutely in a nonfiction section of the book, and at the same time, the writer is making certain claims about what the historical Jesus was and was not as an individual, which is, on the one hand, very interesting, and I think I buy much of what is being presented, and at the same time, it's not delivered to us as fiction, it's delivered to us as fact. So what does that mean? I think what that means is that ultimately, the authorship and whether something is denoted, whether it's fact or fiction, comes into play in terms of the scholarship and the authority that the author is claiming. In other words, if I claimed myself to be an utter expert and I had some backing of that thing where I could kind of prove it if pressed, like I think if I got into a debate with Reza Aslan about facts in his book, my guess is that I would probably lose that argument, whatever that argument might be. So I think what it's coming down to is that most of us, if we're writing a story of fiction and we use historical characters that we know existed in the past, or at least assume that those characters, and we have a reasonable expectation that those characters existed in the past, I am probably going to not have the expertise to claim myself to be such an expert where my opinion can't be challenged. Reza Aslan, for the most part, has the chops, has the scholarship, has degrees that you could put on a wall that will say that his authority is probably, it's going to be tough to challenge. Now, that said, I think there's going to be loads, and there have already been loads of history experts who have challenged his conclusions. But that said, he, based upon the degree, is allowing himself to present it as facts. So is his publisher, even though we as individuals might want to question that authority. So what does that leave us as writers? I think we're probably safe more often than not to say something is fiction, or that it is our reasonable, educated guesses on things. I think that's what's happening a little bit here. I mean, I haven't gotten to the notes section, and there may be like point after point, but in the reading of the basic text, there are no footnotes, so we're sort of presupposed to believe that everything that the author writes down is ultimately been vetted to some degree. And so we're supposed to believe it as fact. Most of us are not going to have that luxury. I think if you ever have any question about some sort of authenticity or reliability in your own writing, you may make note of it. Part of the reason why I'm having this particular discussion today is I think I'm about 2 weeks away from having my book locked. And one of the things, like the actual book itself is done deal, but what isn't a done deal is my acknowledgement section in the book, is my dedication in the book, as well as sort of like my little section that says, hey, listen, I wrote this book about my father. I'm going to say things about him that I can't guarantee. Like, I might describe him as wearing a blue sweatshirt, which is sort of one of the ways that I see him over and over and over again in my mind's eye with great clarity. But on that random Tuesday, when I write about him in 1973, I have to at least own the fact that maybe he was wearing that blue sweatshirt that I see him in, and maybe not. So I think really what we're saying at this point is that, we do our best to be reliable, and at the same time embrace the fact that we're doing the best that we can. And sometimes some readers and some writers have gone above and beyond the pale in understanding something. So anyway, by the way, welcome Gypsy and Bruce. Great to have you here. As always, if you like what I'm doing, please consider hitting the like button or the wow button. Leave a comment anytime you like. We do this all the gosh darn time because writing is a daily activity. So we finish our books, our manuscripts, our screenplays, our poetry collections, the whole kit and caboodle. So anyway, if you're a writer, I always invite you to write questions, whether you see me on YouTube or on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the number of places these videos and podcasts get seen and listened to. So anyway, that's what I've got for today. I'm going to have another thing tomorrow. I'm so grateful that you joined me today, and I'll look forward to presenting you all another episode of Writing Daily real soon. Thanks. Take care.